I'll seamlessly edit that together as if nothing happened.
I need to calm down. The way you described paid media at the beginning hurts me deeply. So I first want to address how much data analysis has to go into handling a Google account well.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Medico Digital Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Joe, Senior Account Manager, Paid Media Aficionado, and supporter of a team which recently went into insolvency and no longer exists, so we don't have to talk about them, which is great. And Alex, Senior Paid Media Manager, more of a Paid Media Aficionado, and I'm told reads more books than I've had hot dinners. So that's Alex and Joe. Welcome to the podcast, guys. How are you doing today?
Very good, thank you.
Very good, thank you. Even better after winning a European trophy. Doing brilliant. Riding
As I said,
wave.
if you make any mistakes, we can edit them out, so don't worry. Cool. Well, what I've brought you here today is not just to waste your time. Something I'm asked a lot as we have started working more recently again with startups and maybe SMEs in the healthcare world, which don't have massive access or a history of access to agencies working on their marketing. I think a really common question is, but what do paid media agencies do? Like, what are we paying you for? And I think it's a fair question. I kind of understand where it comes from. I think we predominantly work in search because that's where most of the online patient journey takes place. Is probably the biggest channel for ROI. And I think the concept behind paid search is relatively straightforward. It's like figure out what people are searching for, use those keywords, send them to your website. And when you put it like that, anyone can do it. And so I understand where the question comes from. It's a bit of a black box. So I don't think people really talk about that often, what goes on underneath or behind the scenes. And the reason I've asked you two to join is I know as a team, you've been working on quite a lot of paid media clients at the moment. So I think you're well placed to talk about it. And I've joined a couple of calls recently, some onboarding calls and some other bits and pieces where I've thought some of the analysis and some of the decision making going on behind the scenes would be something that might be of interest to people that don't have extensive experience working with paid media agencies. Just to lift the lid a little bit on what goes on behind the scenes. What are you actually doing when you say we're doing paid media? Because I think like the word optimization gets thrown around a lot and covers a massive breadth of actual work going on behind the scenes to make sure that clients are getting their maximum ROI. So that is what I've brought you here to ask you about. I'm not going to massively put you on the spot. I've got a bit of a structure we can follow and a couple of documents that we can pull up and have a look at as we go through. But yeah, does that sound good?
Very excited.
Thank you.
Very excited. Lies everywhere already. Unbelievable. So I thought what we'd do is follow a bit of a chronological order for what does it look like for a client when they are working with a paid media agency, maybe for the first time, or when they're moving over to a new agency. And I think this was prompted slightly by being on an onboarding call recently where you guys were looking through some of the historic performance, because I think if a client comes to us and we're not starting from scratch, one of the things that we're going to need to really do is understand what kind of journey they've been on with paid media, what have they been doing, whether they've been managing in-house or externally, like what kind of performance have they been getting. Is it a case that we need to blow everything up and start from scratch? Is it a case that there's lots there that we can kind of work with? So I guess an open-ended question to start with is what does it look like? What are the first things you want to think about when we are bringing on a new client? If I'm saying, Alex, Joe, we've got this lovely new clinic here. They've got years worth of performance marketing experience under their belts. They've got incredibly high standards that they want to hit, and it's a bit of a mess. Good luck. What are you doing first?
Do you want to go first, Joe?
Oh, yeah,
Sorry,
okay.
I should have said who's actually going then, Joe. You start with that.
I'll go because technically I should go first at this juncture. But really, I know it sounds so simple, and this is probably what everyone does. It is to literally understand what needs to be achieved by the business. what are those overarching business goals? Because you'd be surprised the amount of times that we've picked up a Google account and you're looking at it and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, I know what we're doing. And then we ask what needs to be achieved, and it doesn't quite align with the existing paid media strategy. So I think, outlining those kind of key objectives, focus areas, thresholds of performance first and
So
foremost.
when you say it doesn't align with the strategy, what does that look like? Is it that they're saying, well, we want new patient bookings, and you say, well, you're not recording patient bookings?
Exactly. And it could be a plethora of things. It could be elements of location targeting. It could be certain campaign structures, not including the right keywords, or excluding certain kind of key areas that we need to target for the business. And it could also just be maybe they're at that juncture where there's a bit of a refresh needed. So no question is a stupid question, and a hard reset, I think, is the mindset to always take into this, and taking that time to better understand and realign and ask questions they've probably been asked many times before.
What about you, Alex? Is there anything you'd add to that?
Well, I mean, my process through this looks quite different to Joe. So once the client speaks to Joe and we have a good understanding of what's needed, I come in and do my optimizations. The way you described paid media at the beginning hurts me deeply. So I, first of all, just want to address how much data analysis has to go into handling a Google account well. So what we see a lot of the time is clients come to us with an existing Google account, but they haven't really considered or analyzed the data that they have received from their Google Ads activity, which then means where we come in in order to understand what the account has achieved already is a lot of historical analysis. And that comes in through the campaign level, through their monthly fluctuations, how many different search terms or keywords are actually wasting a lot of budget. We see extortionate percentages of search terms that are just completely wasting money, especially when it comes to broad match.
So sorry, just to paraphrase there. So you often get clients coming that are just kind of running on vibes, and as the kids might say, would now be a good time for me to share my screen. I have some anonymized data, which maybe will kind of, if I'm reading what you're saying right, hopefully show us a little bit of what you're talking about here when you're saying there's a lot of data to get through and a lot of things to look at. Is this kind of what you were talking about? So what we have here is data split by campaigns, by months, by ad group, by keyword, etc., and some lovely looking graphs which I'm not clever enough to understand at all.
This is exactly it. So yeah, this would be what I would do with an account as soon as I get my hands on it, in order to understand historical analysis. So that's what these graphs are looking at specifically. So considering how well the account has performed based on really what the specific client is looking for example, sales or leads, and we're analyzing how well that specific metric performs across the months that they have available within Google Ads. Often what we see is specifically in healthcare is, for example, a slower summer because people are going on holidays and this is not necessarily a key priority, but then a really peak season in the winter when people tend to get sick. And that's something that we definitely need to account for when we're looking at, for example, how we're going to adjust the budget according to their performance and seasonality.
Yeah, nice. I don't know how interesting this data is to people that don't necessarily live for the data and maybe are operating slightly by vibes. Maybe that's the people that we're speaking to with a podcast like this. What do you kind of get out of this? Is this where Joe was talking about needing to get a historic understanding and starting from scratch in terms of what the client's looking to achieve, why they're running paid advertising, what they've been doing in the past, maybe some of the more qualitative kind of research into what they're looking at. Is this the other flip side of that, of trying to get into what's actually happening behind the scenes? So they might say, we've been doing crap from paid search and it's not working for us. Is this where you then actually dig into the data and see what's true and what's actually happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, exactly. So at this point, we would correlate what we have heard from the client in terms of their needs. And once we have a good understanding of the data, offer back what we think has worked well and what needs extra work. So, for example, in the column P, that in this specific document, we have outlined which campaigns are just far too expensive for the targets that the client has shared with us. And when we're taking on the account, this will be our immediate priority if this is, for example, a specialty that they want to continue with, but needs some optimization in order to get it to a level that is actually affordable and brings them profit.
Nice. And in this particular anonymized scenario, I can see you've put, I was just wondering what that is as a percentage, and I can see you've already done it as a column here. So what we're saying there is nearly 60% of the media spend is not working for them, which presumably is actually music to your ears, in that there's a huge amount there that can be done with that.
Yes, I actually have a job to do.
Yeah.
It's a good thing for me.
Nice.
I
Okay,
think
cool.
one thing that this lends itself to quite nicely as well is an alignment piece, and going back to that objective part, like campaign A needs to deliver X number of results. I think looking at the results that are also being driven, so taking that a little step further and looking at the context behind each of the campaigns as well. I've seen far too often brand terms seeping into these other campaigns and other areas. This is also a good kind of benchmark checkpoint for us to, okay, everything's set up how it's meant to be.
Yeah.
Or is it not?
And presumably it's coming together there of that qualitative and quantitative understanding of what the client's actually looking for, because we might say from a data perspective, that 60% of media spend is basically being wasted, but there might be some business objectives that we're unaware of where, well, look, we can make a massive loss on the cost per acquisition for those because it's more a brand awareness piece.
And I think a good example of that is a number of clients that we have seen come to us and say, we don't actually believe in a branded campaign. But then when we look under the hood in the search terms, their branded campaigns are coming up a lot of the time and spending a lot of budget because negatives haven't been applied appropriately or haven't been applied at all. In one specific scenario, we have seen a PMAX campaign, which was just pure branded. Performance Max campaign is a campaign that addresses a specific function across the entire marketing funnel with a variety of creatives as well as search ads. So it's a good opportunity to hit your customers at different points of their journey of becoming a lead or a sale. And in this specific scenario, the client had tried to set up the Performance Max for a specialty, but unfortunately, all of the good creative and the good sort of headlines and all the text that they have included didn't really matter that much because the background of the campaign wasn't specific enough. And so what Performance Max and really all Google campaigns will do is try to get the quickest sale, which in this case, because they weren't branded negatives, it did mean that the campaign found it easiest to find branded terms and claim that that was under a specialty when the specialty was very minimal in that campaign. A lot of clients, for example, don't want to run branded campaigns because they have a strong organic branded presence. But we would often recommend having a branded campaign specifically when you have heavy competition. For example, anybody in London should definitely have a branded campaign just because there are so many clinics competing for attention. So yeah, we would always want to have, again, a data-driven decision as to why we shouldn't have a branded campaign. And that does come through analyzing the search terms, understanding with our SEO team, how can we work together in order to ensure that the client has full organic visibility. If the client really doesn't want to go ahead with the branded campaign, but if we can't see a way of not capitalizing enough on that organically, we'll definitely push for it for paid.
Going back to the top, whilst you were talking about kind of some of those things that go into that onboarding piece and findings, I think, and we've seen it recently, I suppose, with some of the new onboarding we've done. Like, I think my biggest challenge is like making aware, and I suppose setting that expectation for like a business that has historically used Google Ads, saying that the shift and the changes that we're going to make, on paper, you may see a reduction in overall performance. Like when we shift that brand away from where it shouldn't be and we tidy things up and we ring fence things, sometimes you do see that short-term fall before we hit that kind of long-term rise of making sure the budget's in the right place.
I know that that's always challenging, and I can relate to, as an account manager, having to communicate that piece. But I think we have enough kind of qualitative data to suggest that this is a short-term loss for a long-term gain. And I think what you do wonderfully, of course, is gain that trust for the clients and really get them to understand the data that we work on in the background.
Because every time I ask the question, I'm instantly thinking about, like, yes, platform, I know Alex is probably going to do and change and tweak. How do I get this across? Like, how do I align this with, like, patient acquisition data? How do we actually marry it up to 10 conversions here led to 3 leads here? That's the hardest part.
Do you mean like on the client's end or within what we can still control?
Yeah. The inquiry to appointment, or whatever the action is, the appointment, the purchase, the actual customer acquisition, leads to acquisition.
Well, I mean, the best that we can do with the limited control that we have within Google Ads healthcare specifically is try to increase the quality of the leads as much as possible, right? Which, again, is the dance of how well am I applying my negatives? Am I actually targeting the correct terms within the funnel stage that I want to get patients at? So, for example, we have seen for specific clients with minimal budget that targeting symptom-based keywords just does not work very well in terms of providing value. But then targeting treatment-specific words or surgery-specific words actually works really well in terms of what we get feedback on, that this is a good quality lead because they were actually looking for a treatment or surgery. So that's like where you come in, right?
And I was going to say, sometimes that's really hard to gauge if systems aren't in place or that isn't tracked as robustly. Because obviously every kind of healthcare provider is different. The systems they use, the way they track their inbound activity. I do like some of the work that we do, though, with some providers on, like, marrying that data up month to month. I think that provides a really, really good scope of impact that digital is having, and I guess paid media is having above other channels.
And that's such a rare gem in healthcare, isn't it? Being able to understand how well you're actually doing in comparison to something like e-commerce, where you get like that immediate buzz, like this has definitely become a sale. You need a whole customer journey with leads and specifically healthcare in order to see if your work has paid off. I always kind of feel on my toes. Just, am I doing well? My dashboards say I'm doing well.
You say that. You've got some stiff competition, I think. I don't know if you've seen them yet. I don't think it's been formally announced, but the SEO guys have rolled out a new report.
Really?
And it's starting to look a little bit more at, like, obviously we've got the rise of AI overviews and the influence of kind of AI search and how that's driving users to the site. Very, very minimal at this stage. However, with some of the reporting they've put together, they've started to look at site as a whole, impact of organic, change over time. But they don't just look at organic, they bring all channels in there. So they've got these graphs now in their SEO reports that are like percentage of overall traffic driven by organic and then by paid and so on and so forth. And I thought it was really interesting because you don't have to worry about it. But it is part of that bigger conversation we have to have, especially with kind of multi-location healthcare providers who are day-to-day, week-to-week, like, measuring the performance of each clinic or site location and the strategies being deployed there. What's working, what's not, what do we need to change, how do we need to address Bristol versus London versus Birmingham versus Northern Ireland. And it's just it's very interesting.
And again, that's so valuable for us to be able to work together across departments and for the clients to have like complete transparency over where they're getting the most value, where we are delivering value.
Yeah. You know what? It is tough sometimes, but I think like to have minimum 3 people kind of looking at it every day, every other day.
Across a number of accounts. Yeah. Something that we mentioned was the short-term loss for long-term gain. So oftentimes what we see after we've made these changes to accounts is that those campaigns that were delivering superficial value are then not really being cannibalized anymore, or getting things that aren't really the true conversion. And then over time, they become actually optimized towards what they're supposed to be optimized towards, which then generates a much better long-term value and allows us to create campaigns that tailor to specific things that the client is looking for.
So in those instances, are the clients, they're obviously being led by data, led by reports, but the reports are showing conversions. It's not necessarily aligned with overall revenue. Is that kind of what you're saying there? In that, well, you might be getting tons of conversions coming through this branded campaign, but you're going to be getting any of that revenue anyway, and we can put your paid media spend towards better use by pushing in a slightly different area. So your reports are going to look a bit crap because we're actually taking credit for less conversions, but overall you're going to be booking more revenue.
Well, one very good example of that that's quite simple to understand is the setup of a conversion. So you can set up your conversion to count once, or you can set it to count every single time that conversion happens. And for example, for clients who track calls and form submissions and emails and every other conversion action that they possibly can, what we will see oftentimes is something like 200% conversion rate for a specific conversion action. That means somebody has converted twice. One has converted twice on a specific action, and that's just one conversion when you get to the back end. But Google will count it as 2 conversions if you didn't set up your conversion tracking correctly.
That makes sense. So you're only getting paid once, but we're taking credit for conversions twice, unless we're fixing that.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
We don't want to do that. Okay, cool. Are there any other obvious common mistakes that are worth flagging, or that you'd like to get out there? Things that frustrate you because you see people doing them, or should we move on to the next section in the chronological order of the experience of working with a paid media agency?
I mean, I have one thing that I wanted to mention that has been a pretty significant thing for us as an agency. What we see in healthcare, paid healthcare specifically, is what I just mentioned, the fact that often our clients want to measure several different conversion actions within a single campaign. Now, what a lot of people that don't have a paid media specialist, they will not know how Google treats those different conversions. So, for example, Google will find it much easier to get you a call. Now, a call is not necessarily a better or more valuable conversion than the form submission, but it's easier for Google to get, especially under specific bidding strategies, which means that a lot of the time we will see clients who want to see all the different conversions that a patient can take within a single campaign lean towards calls, which will then absolutely skew how Google's spending your budget. So, for example, you will have a lot of your budget shifted towards Monday and Tuesday because that's when most people call, but you won't have much budget left for the weekend. That's tends to be actually when people might be more likely to complete a form submission or an appointment because they actually can't call you. What we see a lot of the time is it's actually better to separate conversion events depending on what you want a patient to do within that specific campaign. We want to receive calls for people who are wondering about the service, but we want to receive form submissions for people who already know they want to book a service.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think the other thing that I've often seen with calls specifically, and less so form fills or direct bookings, they can be really muddied, I suppose, with people that are confused about the service. So if it's thinking they're calling maybe an NHS service rather than a private service, or they're already patients and they've got the number and they're looking for quick access to how do they get in touch with a clinic. And every time you're paying for one of those people to come through and call, well, you're paying for it, and it's also taking up your support team's time in terms of actually taking that call. But
Exactly.
like you said, it's often a much cheaper, faster conversion for Google to be able to optimize towards. So it makes sense that that's something to watch out for in terms of how you're setting up your campaigns. Joe, any others on that side of things?
Not really, other than the fact that like talking about like when you have multiple campaigns that are quite similar, could be doing the same thing. Looking at how kind of conversions interact with one another there, and making sure that not so much that you're bidding against yourself, but having that kind of clean bill of health and that setup part is essential to getting this next piece right as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So moving on to the next side, because the onboarding side of understanding what clients are doing, unpicking things that have been potentially going wrong, making sure they have a really great experience and was set up for future success, I think all makes sense. I think where I often see clients come to us who have had a bad experience with another agency, I think the message is always very, very similar there. And it's usually that the agency have stopped being proactive, stopped providing any kind of innovation, stopped kind of pushing value, and maybe coasting a bit once they've got to a level of performance that the client's relatively happy with. So what I wanted to ask about is a couple of specific ways that we might be able to show some proactivity, add some additional value. And what I've actually done is tricked you into coming onto this podcast just so I can try and shoehorn AI into the conversation and talk about how you're using that. And I've wrapped it cleverly in something that I knew you'd actually come and speak to me about. But I have seen behind the scenes you guys using those two letters. I've seen you using AI. I've heard bits and pieces about how you're starting to integrate that beyond what the platforms can actually do to support clients. Tell me what that looks like, and I'm going to make loads of snippets and content about this and pretend we've not said anything else.
Who would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. The amount of times that I'm involved in like a strategic meeting where we're deploying a new service or a new campaign, and we're about 30 seconds in, and the client has already mentioned 3 prescriptions or drugs that will never ever see the light of day on Google Ads. And they're like, can we go live? Can we go live next week? Maybe.
So just to again approach that from what it looks like from my side of things, we have recently struggled, or we have received a client in an area that I am not particularly familiar with in terms of Google policies. My response to that was to feed my AI all of the available information about what it's like to operate within that area for healthcare policies. And then once my AI was trained on those policies, feed it landing page information for our specific client and competitors in order to be able to understand how competitors might be able to achieve being advertising within that specialty and how we can try to do something similar. How can we word it specifically? What pictures can we use? What can we say? You know, the AI would essentially become very specific in being able to see a landing page, understand the policies, and say, you will not be able to say this, but try this instead.
Love that, because and it hits home for me because back in the day, working in those areas on the tools, as it were, or trying to put together paid media campaigns, it's always been a problem in healthcare. Google have always had excluded lists of things that you can and can't say, but they've never been exhaustive about providing you the information on what you can and can't say. So the most common question we've had from clients that have to deal with these issues is the competitor that I hate down the road is running campaigns on a specific thing. Why can't we? And it's always been a case of it's trial and error. We are trying to get that through, but there's no roadmap given to you by Google of exactly how you can structure your campaigns to be compliant within very niche parts of those policies. And for us, that was always a really manual case of looking at everything that competitors might be doing, setting up multiple versions of each campaign with slight tweaks and changes, trying to make sure that we're not triggering too many areas of the account that's going to be getting it suspended or anything like that, and trying to operate within the rules. And it's really, really time consuming. So I guess what you're saying there is being able to feed all of the current available information, the most recent policies, landing pages from competitors, probably ad copy from competitors as well, then gives you basically as a kind of a superpowered consultant that's up to speed on all the latest policies and is able to spot what is and isn't happening in terms of the way things are being worded or the way ads are being structured, that you can then try in your ads to get past those blockers. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, because you can feed it so much data that, of course, the human brain unfortunately cannot understand all at once. And it can compare many different variables that we might not have considered, and provide suggestions on what could be triggering the policy. So it's just much faster and much better at understanding the depth of the data provided.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just that either. I think it's the next step as well. It's that feedback loop. It's the tried and tested approach, taking some of that information, aligning with the client on how we're going to tweak the landing page content, things we're going to include and not include, keywords we can and can't use, deploying that, going live, seeing a much more streamlined, faster time from build to go live, seeing it work, feeding that information back into AI as well to say, hey, this has worked. Take that forward with our learning for future campaigns as well.
Yeah, nice. Is there anything else on the AI side that you've been using recently that you'd like to talk about? If not, I will cut out asking that question.
Well, another project that Joe and I have worked on together was for a localized clinic, a physical clinic. And what we wanted to understand was across the different services and specialties that this clinic offers, how can we make sure that we're maximizing our budget within the area that they operate in? So something that we have done with AI was, first of all, feed it the location analysis. Yes, this is it actually.
Yes, that's what I was doing in the background and hoping that I was doing the same thing that you were talking about.
But we have downloaded this data and we fed it to the AI anonymized, and we wanted to see how the different postcodes in London correlate to the performance that's being generated by specific services. The next step in the process was to understand how close those specific postcodes are to the clinic and whether this is correlated with how well they perform. In this case, yes, they were. So the closer the postcode was to the clinic, the better it performed. But also, the sort of another layer that we have found was the more affluent postcodes were also the converting ones because it's a private clinic. So we have been, I'm not particularly familiar with London postcodes, but in this way we were able to use the AI to train it to understand the traveling distances within different postcodes and the affluent levels of those postcodes in order to be able to correlate how well they could perform for that specific service, and then use that to optimize the campaign with the location specific bidding.
Amazing. Yeah. So what I'm hearing there, and I appreciate that you haven't taken the knowledge and you're not a black cab driver. I wouldn't necessarily expect you to have a really good understanding of all of the different postcodes in London, but in theory, makes sense. Private clinics catering to a slightly more affluent demographic. Postcodes, you can often split by affluence, and drive time to the clinic would also have a fairly significant impact. So what you've done is use historical campaign data to prove that that is the case, and not just a theory, and then uploaded that data into AI to use AI to predict how performance is going to look on the postcodes based on the perceived level of affluence, distance to the specific clinic in mind. And that allows us to then set prioritization and budgets for postcodes going forwards to improve performance. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And we could do that for 10, 20, 30 campaigns far quicker than 12 months ago, 24 months ago.
Yeah. Again, when I was cutting my teeth in some of this stuff, this would have been days worth of work to try and map out exactly where that postcode sits, and that's not necessarily a problem, but it's very expensive for clients to be fronting the cost of that level of research. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting and cool use case for AI within paid media that doesn't get talked about that much. I think a lot of the targeted bidding and everything that someone like Google might be implementing behind the scenes to actually support campaigns is what gets a lot of the limelight. But it's interesting to see where you can use kind of out of the box tools, but with a little bit of creativity behind the scenes to match up what the data you're able to get out of the ad platforms, and then what kind of decisions you're able to make on top of those.
I think it opens the door for a really strategic conversation with the healthcare provider as well, to a point where we've done our analysis, we've found top performing areas, we've highlighted some new areas. That often takes that conversation away, and for the healthcare provider to go, I guess, offline and actually look at some of their patient acquisition data and their treatment data. Where are they seeing these patients come from? So not only are we looking from a digital perspective, what's working well in driving that initial inquiry and that engagement, how is that also converting at the other end? And where are those new affluent postcodes that we've brought in? How are those converting against our baseline? Are we now seeing a better quality of patient come in? Are we now operating in a space that is more effective than that previous strategy? And it's something that we can kind of, that monthly, weekly touch point is very much around that piece. These are the postcodes and areas that are working well. How does that align with the inbound activity and the new patients that are coming on board?
Yeah, that's great. And that's great to hear. And I think that's something else that you often hear in terms of slightly poorer experiences with potentially other paid media agencies, is that lack of kind of strategy and a roadmap to be able to follow for the client to be able to understand where we're at and where we're trying to get to. And I think if you can use benchmarks, have hypotheses about how you're going to improve performance and follow that journey in a really clear way, it makes it much easier for a client to understand the value they're getting or what's going on behind the scenes at a paid media agency, which is the whole point of this discussion. So thank you for that. Taken up a lot of your time. We've had a lot of technical difficulties. Just in the last 5 minutes, I just wanted to come back to a conversation that Joe and I actually had previously for the single fan of the podcast, you may remember from a previous episode. We talked about how the meta ads, paid ads, healthcare policies changed at the turn of the year, and basically flipped on its head everything that we were previously doing with Meta, and the ability that we had to get in front of patients at the right time. So I just wanted to touch on that again. We don't need to go over exactly what those changes were. If anyone listening is interested, they can go back to the previous episode, link in the show notes. But where are we at the moment with Meta ads? Like, how in the overall marketing mix of where we typically, if we're just looking at, for example, healthcare clinics looking to acquire patients, like how are we using Meta? What's changed? I'll start with Alex. Like, what have you found has changed with Meta over the last few months in terms of how you're using it?
It has definitely been challenging, and some clients have adapted better than others. But one huge win that we have seen across the board has been brand awareness. And this is something that works very well when we're considering a cross-platform approach. So, for example, for clients that have lost the ability to track leads on Meta, what we have tried to do was build their brand awareness through video and engagement ads on Meta in order to then see whether this would scale their brand awareness, or people who are searching for the brand on Google. And we have had significant success in seeing people look for the brand directly, because of a budget increase within brand awareness, video, and engagement ads on Meta. So that's definitely one big success we have seen.
So that's really interesting. So I think previously, before the policy updates, Meta was typically, we were using it a lot more at the bottom of the funnel, where we were using search to target potential patients, get them onto a website, and then maybe retarget them through Meta if they hadn't yet converted with some additional value. What you're saying is the inability to do that retargeting at the moment has meant that we've had to look for other opportunities to use Meta, and you're finding good value for that at that top of the funnel where we're getting in front of the right demographic. Presumably that's a relatively low cost kind of CPM at that top of the funnel, or like what are you using in terms of targeting to target that brand awareness? Is that just like relatively open-ended at the moment, and what you're using and hoping for is a low cost CPM to push the right types of people through to looking for the brand?
So for example, with an awareness campaign, we'll be looking at people who actually want to watch the video that we have put in front of them, which, for example, would be introducing the clinic or the services they offer. So we would be looking at reviews as a conversion trackable action which is still available in Meta. In engagement campaigns would be slightly different. We're looking at people who have either already engaged with the video in the awareness campaign as a form of retargeting, or again with targeting prospecting audiences, but this time we want them to engage with the content that we put in front of them, which might be a video on a very specific service, which leads to a landing page of that service, or a blog, which unfortunately we cannot track to that level anymore, but we can see that people have engaged with the post, liked it, shared it, etc. So we're looking for people to actually spread the message at that level.
Okay, so that initial targeting is just relatively wide, so it might be based on the rough gender, age, location that are looking for a specific treatment, and what we're relying on is those kind of low CPMs, and for that to be a broad net. And anyone that's then interested in the clinic or looking at the clinic is when we're kind of funneling them down and trying to re-engage them through an engagement campaign. That makes sense. Joe, it was obviously you that I spoke to earlier in the year about some of those changes. How have you found navigating the downfall of Meta from where it sat previously in our marketing mix?
It's got better. It's definitely got better as time's gone on. And I think building on what Alex has said around that awareness into engagement piece, in terms of like who we're targeting, we have gone further up a funnel, but a lot of that from conversion section has kind of just shifted up. So we still have our really kind of well-engaged, well-identified demographics within that engagement piece that we can drive on to those landing page experiences. And one of the key things that we've looked at that's changed is the metrics we report on. I'm in calls now when we talk about Meta, meetings we have, I'm talking a little bit more about click-through rate and frequency and impressions, and then how that translates into potential organic brand search over time, our conversion rate of our paid brand campaign of Google Ads, and looking at maybe metrics and impact that we weren't focusing on so much before when we had, albeit a generous one, an attribution model that we could lean on from a Meta perspective. That's gone completely. So I think first and foremost, there is a slight change in tact when it comes to performance measures and what good looks like now, and where we need to be focusing our time and budget. Budget is the other one that's also very, very important. And in instances where healthcare providers and specific clinic locations have set KPIs and objectives they need to achieve in terms of new patient acquisition, there have been conversations around whether or not previously set budgets from 2024 are fit for purpose with this strategy in 2025. And in more cases than not, the answer is no, they're not. And we have seen and advised on kind of healthcare provider by healthcare provider basis, scaling those budgets back from Meta and shifting that focus into a more robust Google Ads strategy, be it increasing our budget and visibility for pre-existing campaigns, or starting to look at other opportunities from a Google Ads perspective, like demand gen, where we're able to create a complete loop of kind of patient activity, provide that attribution piece and say, look, we know this played a much bigger part in those baseline numbers that you're seeing month on month.
But I think that being said as well, we would not advise to shut off Meta ads or anything like that. If anything, this is a case scenario for really pushing further and exploring different platforms and having a cross-platform strategy, which is again something that you definitely need a paid media agency for, because we would not expect anybody to have the knowledge of Google Ads, Meta ads, TikTok, Bing, everything. And depending on how much budget people have or clients have, that can extend to programmatic, which does get a little bit more challenging and is very awareness based. So what happened with Meta really is a proof of concept that with healthcare specifically, anything can happen at any time and you can lose a lot of control. And it's our job to be creative and to come up with new solutions to those problems. And really, that's the key to having a partner in online marketing, really.
Yeah, well said. I think there are some interesting through lines there between what you both said. and where the whole industry is going. Because I think up until now, probably the most ROI favorable way of getting patients in front of your services, or getting services in front of patients, I should say, is to rely on the fact that a lot of that research takes place within Google. So that's kind of the magnet to pull that needle out of the haystack, as it were, where if somebody has a particular condition, they're looking for confirmation of symptoms, or they are understanding about the procedure. They're looking for things like recovery time and reviews and things like that. And if you can have a level of organic awareness there, they start to understand that your brand is, or that plays the big part of your brand awareness piece. But I think as AI search becomes more and more prominent, and we're already starting to see it, but you'd imagine over the next couple of years that's really going to come into force and possibly make that initial awareness piece from organic search slightly redundant in that, yes, it will be useful if you can be surfaced within AI citations. But I guess what I'm trying to say there is if you can get comfortable with prospecting patients through multiple platforms in a cost-effective way that's going to generate that pipeline of potential patients for your clinic now, I think then you're going to be in a really good position as that shift happens over the next couple of years, because you're not overly reliant on one platform. Coming back to what you just said at the end there is I think you need to hedge your bets slightly when you're operating in paid media, because any little policy update, any little change, any little automated flag or suspension can absolutely upend your business in terms of its revenue flow. So good to make sure you've got a good breadth of marketing channels running and all operating together. And if you don't already have that, reach out to hello@medicodigital.co.uk and have a chat with Joe and Alex. Guys, anything else you want to say on this? I know we've kind of overrun a little bit, so I don't want to keep you.
My only thing is, I know like healthcare is very challenging, and more challenging than something like e-commerce, for example. And one thing that I want our clients to be aware of, which Joe is so excellent at delivering at the client level, is that we really know what we're doing. You know, we're in this every day, and we are the specialists in this area. So, you know, working with Joe has been such a pleasure, just because we can share ideas and really communicate the challenges between ourselves and the clients so effectively. And I think that really the cornerstone is the community and working together within healthcare to come up with solutions. And I think I'm very proud to work in a place that does that so proactively.
That is that's a lovely sentiment, but you mentioned Joe's name too many times, so we're going to have to cut that as well.
Yeah.
I'm glad you went first, because I can't follow that. So we're going to cut this whole thing right now. I was going to share the same. I think one thing I was going to say is, like, working here with other like-minded professionals in this vein, I think one thing we do very well is we kind of put our feet in the shoes of, like, we're on the ground, we're in that clinic. What is the actual end objective? And yeah, like you said, I'm just very grateful to be surrounded by a team that has that same mindset.
Nice.
As well.
I'll slip you your £10 notes after this. No, thank you for that. I think that was really interesting. And if anyone's made it to the end, then you're our type of nerd, and give us a shout, because there's so much to talk about on the paid media side. I think we're only really scratching the surface there. But I think this hopefully will be a little bit of a nice kind of look behind the scenes in terms of the value and what you're actually trying to get from a paid media agency, even if it's just to look at your own current incumbent agencies and maybe ask a bit more from them if they're not giving you some of that proactive value add. All right, cool. Thank you, guys. Let's wrap it there, and lovely to speak to you. We'll see you again.
Nice to see you.
Take care.